Morning everyone, welcome back to Fox Speed Shop. Tim here again. It's a little bit chilly in the garage this morning, so I've got a nice sponsored brew on the go. And what I'm aiming to do today, I've had a few requests to sort of talk people through some of the lost art of testing and modifying dynamos as part of a charging system. Now we're going to be specifically looking at the Fiat 500 today. So I've got a dynamo and I'm going to show you how to test it, show you how to check that it works, how to test the output, and also how to change the brushes on a dynamo that's already in the car. Because to remove the dynamo on a Fiat 500 is slightly complicated. You have to either have the hands of a baby and be able to get your arms right up into tight spaces, or you have to strip down a lot of the tinware, which is quite a pain. So I'm going to show you how you can do it with the dynamo still installed on the car, and how we can test it once we've changed the brushes. Okay, so first of all, for those of you that your Fiat might be your first old car, I suppose we should start with what is actually a dynamo. Okay, so this is a dynamo here. Now a dynamo is really a direct current generator. And we'll have a little look at, how it works. We're not talking massive sort of electrical engineering here, okay? This is GCSE physics at best. What you have is effectively the same setup as a motor, like you'd have for your starter motor, okay? So you have an output there, and you have a field coil, okay? So the field coil wraps around there, you have an armature in the centre, and you've got magnets, and you have brushes that feed the current in here, which is quite probably what's wrong with the one that's actually on the car at the moment. If you wonder why this one's off the car, it's a known working good one. The only reason it's off is because the threads are chewed up on the end here, where, if you remember from a previous video, I had to cut the fan out of the housing and unfortunately damaged this one. So with a motor, what you do is you apply 12 volts in and you get motion coming out the other side. A direct current generator like this, when it's running as a generator, fundamentally does the opposite. You have motion coming in, which is provided by your fan belt, and you generate direct current out of here. What you have is a voltage regulator that steps effectively between here and the field coil and moderates the voltage coming out by moderating the current coming in to the field coil here, so that your generator doesn't run out of control, produce 30, 40, 50 volts and burn itself out. So we're going to run a couple of tests on here. I'm going to demonstrate how you can test a generator when it's out of the car to actually check whether it's working functionally, and then we'll talk about how you can actually test it using a multimeter like this. This one is an adjustable multimeter, but really any form of analog or digital multimeter, you'll be able to do all of these tests that we're going to be doing today, absolutely no problem at all. Now, to ensure that this actually functions, we're going to run it as a motor. So I've moved it down here onto the floor, and what I've done is, because it's not in the car and it doesn't have an earth, I have wired an earth cable from here just directly to a known good 12-ish volt battery. I have wired together the field coil and the output coil there. That's right, the field coil and the output. So therefore the brushes and the coil are linked together, just with a thin cable. We're going to use that later on for actually testing the one that's in the car. And what we're going to do is we're going to apply a 12 volt live to this. And what we should see happening is the motor spinning, or the generator spinning and acting like a motor. So there we go. We know that that is good. And so therefore, if it runs that way as a motor, it should run the other way as a generator. Okay, so in order to do the tests on the car, what we're going to have to do is have it running. And we are going to first of all disconnect these two terminals here. So this is 67, the field, and this is 51, which is the direct current output. Now the two tests that we're going to do on the multimeter is we are going to look for, with the engine running, we're going to look for testing between here and a known good ground, which I know this is a good ground here as I've used it for testing before, and we're looking for an output of probably no more than a volt. And then what we're going to do is we're going to daisy chain together the field coil and 51, the output there, and we're going to do the same test again. Now we should see a much higher voltage there, because what will be happening is that the current coming out here will be being passed back down into the field coil, and effectively will be increasing the strength of the magnetic field. And as you increase the strength of the magnetic field, what you're going to be doing is you are going to be increasing the voltage output from here. Now, under normal circumstances, that's what's regulated by the voltage regulator. Certainly one of the things that's regulated by the voltage regulator, because if we were allowed this engine to rev up and we were allowed we allowed that current to flow uninterrupted, that's when you'd start getting your voltage output rising until you melted the solder on the armature and sort of shorted everything out. So we're going to be careful to monitor and only run that test for a short while. It's going to be difficult to hear me over the engine, so what I'll do is I'll just try and show on screen the voltage output from here. Now, I'm not expecting to see anything because I know that this dynamo is not working. In fairness, I bought it as sold as seen, very cheap, untested. I knew that there was a risk it wasn't going to be working, but what I'm hoping to be able to do today is to change the brushes and actually get it to work correctly. That would be nice. Otherwise, I'm going to have to take it out and I'm going to have to run some more tests to make sure there's no shorts in the field coil or the armature. I might do that today, depends on how much time we've actually got. I don't want this one to run on for too long. Okay, so as you saw there, when we ran that straight off here with the disconnected field coil, we had a voltage of milliamps. That's clearly not enough. So what I've done is I've built a little bridging cable here that, as I say, joins the field coil to the output here. And again, I'm going to run the engine for a very short while, just let it come up to speed, and I'm going to measure the voltage output here. And again, we're going to be expecting that to be probably around about 20 volts. I don't suppose we'll see that. I suspect we'll see millivolts again. Again, millivolts. We have no good output from that generator, from that dynamo. So clearly there's something wrong inside. My suspicion is that it's the brushes are not working. That's why it doesn't work as a motor. That's why it also doesn't work producing any output. But I'll show you how you can investigate that and change that with the dynamo still in the car, because what you don't want to have to do is unbolt it all from here to take the fan off the back of it, which means, as I said earlier on, you have to have the hands of a baby to reach down there and to actually get that off. And even if you do manage to get it out, reinstalling it with all the tinware in the car is not a job that I particularly want to do. Okay, so first thing to note, if you're going to perform any sort of test in situ like this, is you want to make sure that you can get rid of the rear crossmember panel here. Okay, so what I've done is I've already loosened the engine mounts there, and I have it propped up on a transmission jack with a plank of wood underneath the sump there, which is just going to keep the engine supported whilst we remove this this cross member here. It's not actually connected to it at all. As you can see, it's sitting loose there. But if I want to get to the front of the dynamo there, and I want to be able to pull off the pulley at the front, and I want to be able to get to the brushes and change all of that, it's so much easier with this not in place. And as I say, all you need to do is make sure you have something underneath there. Transmission jack works nicely because it's nice and wide. This plank of wood sits right underneath the exhaust and also right underneath there. You could do it with a trolley jack, might be slightly unbalanced, but you're pretty much going to be okay. So what we're going to do is just remove the 4 bolts for the cross member there, and then we'll be able to start having a look at how we actually disconnect the fan belt, pulleys, spacers, etc. there. One of the things that makes these cars so nice to work on is that they're very simple and straightforward to strip parts off like that. Now you can see what you've got there is your fan drive belt, driven by the crank pulley there, and it drives the pulley on the dynamo generator. Obviously without that you wouldn't have any current being produced here. It's also attached to the cooling fan at the back there, which obviously spins round at the same speed as the motor and blows the cool air through the fan housing here and across the engine block and keeps your air-cooled engine actually cool. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to remove this. Now this is in a couple of stages and I'm not going to film all of them. You've got 3 bolts here, 3 nuts here, and what you do is you remove them. You can then take the front part of the pulley off, which allows you to remove the fan belt. Once you remove the fan belt, you can then pull the back part of the pulley off there. What you should note on yours, it will be probably a different number to mine, is that there is a number of very thin metal washers with 3 prongs to sit over here, and what they do is they actually control the belt tension. So the fewer of them you have, the tighter the belt is compressed in there, and the tighter it gets. This is actually set to be roughly right, so you can play around with those to get your setting correct. But if it's all right, when you strip it down, you want to make sure you don't lose any of those, otherwise you're going to make your belt tighter than it needs to be. Once you've got that, you'll be able to see that there is a pulley with these 3 studs mounted on the end of the dynamo, and that's where we'll next pick up when we start to remove that part. So I've got 4 of these washers on mine for setting the belt tension. Again, you might have 3, it depends on how loose the belt is. So we'll put those down there, make sure that they don't go missing. Now this here is your hub that actually drives the commutator there, driven by the fan belt. Okay, you can hear the bearings are okay in there, there's no grumbling, a little bit of squeaking. Now what you've got on there is you've got a 17mm nut, and on the other side there's another 17mm nut, which is actually what holds the fan on. This bit's going to be reasonably easy to do, not too much fiddling. Where a little bit more fiddling is going to occur is when we actually have to remove these 2 here, which are the ends of the studs that run right the way through here. Now I've just had a little look at these and realised we're going to have a bit of a problem, because whoever has built this has put these back in the wrong way. There should be a nut on this end and there should be the stud at the other end. Makes it so that we can pull the front end off here. However, what we're going to have to do is try and get the nut off the back, which means unfortunately we're not going to be able to continue with what we're trying to do today, because we will never manage to get this off without losing the nut at the other end, and we'll never be able to put it back together. So thanks to whoever put this together in the first place, you've really done me a solid there. Okay guys, well, apologies for that. I will get that sorted, but it's going to take me a little bit longer, and unfortunately I'm not going to be able to show you how to do it in the car. I can talk you through the theory of how to do it in the car, which I will do in a moment, but it just goes to show that the best laid plans of mice and men fall apart when someone's installed something incorrectly, or at least opposite to how I would have installed it. So not everything's as slick on YouTube as you might be believed when you see some of the professionals. So if you're a bit of a garage jockey like me, you may well run into issues, and as the saying goes, any 5-minute job is only one stripped bolt away from a 3 or 4 day ordeal. As I have a handy spare here, I can demonstrate what I was going to try and show you with the one on the car. So you can see here we actually have the nuts on the end, and we have the the other end of the stud here, which means when it's sitting in the car, we'd be able to draw the face off it without losing these studs. These studs would remain in here. The way it's set up at the moment, obviously with the nut being on the back here, I can't actually get anything on it to hold it, and therefore it's going to cause a bit of a problem. These do sit relatively captive in there, and so you can pull the nut off the front if you're careful without having to do anything to the back there. So I'll just show you that on this one. See, not fiddling with the back at all. 10mm will loosen these off. If it was sitting straight in the car there, if you put a little bit of tension on that, that nut will just come off nicely. Likewise, the nut will come off quite nicely on the bottom one. A little bit stiffer there. I haven't faked this, by the way, those were torqued down correctly beforehand. We'll get those off there. Then it's a case of pulling the front end off. Now the brushes, you can see here, point that out, the brushes sit in brush holders here like this, and then there's another one on the other side contacting the armature. There's a commutator on the end there with the copper contacts. And what we would be doing, if that was in situ in the car, is we'd pull the end off like so, leaving the dynamo in the car like that. Now these studs you're going to want to be careful with, because you don't want to push them out the back. It's not a problem here because I can get to the back end of it, but you imagine that's got a fan on the back of it and it's behind all that tinware. Not going to be so clever. What I didn't mention is I have already removed the wood rough key from here. If you don't remove the wood rough key from here, you cannot pull the faceplate brush holder off your dynamo. Now obviously what we would have been doing today is leaving that in situ in the car, and we'd have had that plate off the front there, and you can see the brushes here. Now the brushes sit against springs. They're spring loaded to maintain pressure against the commutator, and what you have is you have one held with the screw here, you have another held with the screw here. That one is output to the terminal 51, which is your DC output, and this one here simply runs to earth. What they do is they sit on here, and the commutator, again, you remember GCSE physics, is made up of individual copper contacts there, which enables the magnetic field to keep inverting and to drive the motor constantly round, so that it doesn't do one half turn and then stop. So what we were going to be doing is working on the one in the car. Obviously, as we're not working on the one in the car, I'm going to demonstrate you a few little tricks with this, as to how you can get this back onto the dynamo body itself whilst it remains in situ and you can't get to the back of these studs. Okay, there's a couple of little hints. Number one, you have got brushes and brush springs that are holding the brushes in, so they are just pushing where the end of the armature goes. So you could possibly slide it over there without too much of an issue. Okay, problem is they need to sit against the commutator itself, and that's going to be very difficult to happen when they're being sprung in like this. And unless you have a million hands, you're going to find that a little bit difficult, unless of course you do something like this. If you have a little look at the faceplate here, and we push the brush as far out as it can go, a small part of the spring becomes visible here. If you can see that on there, not visible, push the brush out, visible. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply jam part of a Dremel into there to hold that in place, which is then going to hold the brush sprung outwards rather than sprung inwards, and give us the space to get it over the commutator. So to do that, just hold it in place and wedge something in there. Could be a thin screwdriver, take your pick, holds it in place. And you can see there, we now have full space to allow that to go over where the commutator is going. Okay, so here we are simulating it being mounted in the car. I really don't want to be touching the back end there, because if it was in the car I wouldn't be able to. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to use a screwdriver to roughly align where these are. And get this into position. Push the brushes into their holder, and the other one is there. And obviously that would have been held in the car, so I wouldn't have had to have got my hand around the back of that, because that wouldn't have popped out. But there you go, the front is on. Okay, now I didn't quite align the bolts there, which is what I should have done. So what I can do is just pull that out slightly. Oops, so I pulled that out slightly, can't see that on the camera there. And ensure the brushes do not come off the commutator. Give that a little bit of a wobble. Align that bolt there. And align the bolt at the bottom. And then we can just, again, push that over. And what we end up with is it all aligned. And I didn't push that out the back, so I'd just be able to get a nut on there. Again, just hold that with a little screwdriver or a little small pair of pliers, or even put a little circlip over it, and we'd be able to get that on there. And you can pull out these two, and what you have there is an assembled dynamo, done basically one-handed on the car with new brushes. Well, it wasn't quite what I set out to record, but hopefully it's been vaguely educational. Sadly, I can't now test the reinstalled dynamo on the car, because I haven't been able to take it out and I haven't been able to change anything. But presuming that yours has been installed with the nuts on the outside of the brush holder rather than around the other way, you should find not really any problems. As you can see, it took me about 2 minutes there with just one hand, really one hand, to simulate holding it in the car. When it's mounted to the tinware, you're going to find it's not going to try and slide backwards and forwards, so you can actually get both hands on the front in order to spring those brushes back and to get that back. But it wasn't particularly difficult. As I say, these are what come in really handy. Anything that has a Dremel sized shaft on it can be used to spring back those brush holders, and then any form of small screwdriver can be used just to kind of jimmy the thing back into place. Well, anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you found that slightly less frustrating than I found it actually sitting here in the garage recording the thing. But if you enjoyed any of this content or any of the previous content, feel free to hit like, feel free to subscribe, feel free to give me any advice in the comments, or to tell me I've done it completely and utterly wrong and you'd have done it totally differently. I mean, that's what the internet's all about, isn't it? Sharing opinion. Okay, take care, see you next time.